So with that, Mr. Fadden, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. And on behalf of the Richards of the world, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak about an issue that I've worked on for a large number of years, and I must admit, never with a great deal of success. To some degree, our inability to effect improvements in defence procurement prompted me to reflect on these challenges with limited improvements in mind. It's these reflections that I hope to pass on to you today, and I hope that they're useful. Before I come to my substantive remarks, 2 meta points. First, I served both Conservative and Liberal governments, and I am convinced my remarks apply to both periods. Secondly, there is no silver bullet to this multifaceted problem. Over the years, I've discussed and studied the DP experience of our allies, and everywhere there are levels of complexity that show elements of similarity with ours. I believe there are 3 groupings or institutions principally responsible for defence procurement: politicians, public servants, and the defence industry. I'll concentrate on the first 2. Let me take them in turn. Politicians entirely appropriately set a number of pan-governmental objectives to be pursued. Each objective on its own may be entirely appropriate and reasonable to pursue. The problem with DP arises when they conflict with one another. So, in the area of defence procurement, military acquisitions potentially conflict with regional development, innovation, industrial, and any number of other objectives. These objectives are then bureaucratized by the public service and add considerable complexity for everyone involved, including the private sector. Over time, all of this develops a culture which itself becomes highly problematic. More on this in a second. I'm not suggesting these objectives should be ignored in the context of defence procurement, but rather their impact should be detailed and made public so that a judgment can be made on the appropriate balance between the objectives, the various objectives. And B, in specific circumstances, not routinely, but not rarely, the public service should be able to recommend and the government accept that the application of some specific objectives should be suspended. These suspensions in support of urgent defence acquisitions should be susceptible of acceptance by Parliament and the media, another area potentially where cultural change would be necessary. Now to the public service. Concern about the reaction of ministers, the House, the media, have made public servants very rule and process-oriented and very risk-averse. I suggest this has become the dominant culture with respect to any public servant who has anything to do with defence procurement. The Federal Accountability Act also does not help, not the act itself, but the way that it's been implemented. I'm not advocating irresponsible action, but rather acceptance of some measure of risk and the possibility of error in favour of more effective acquisitions. In practice, this might mean an environment where acceptance of exceptions to rules in favour of special arrangements can be sought without being career-limiting. One easy example is the public service has become extraordinarily reticent to take any action that raises the possibility of litigation, even though over the years the government wins most of the litigation. There's a real resistance, and this just gridlocks things because of the fear of litigation. Another issue shared by ministers and public services is the principle that defence procurement rules apply across the board, notwithstanding the size or complexity of specific acquisitions. I know here that I'm generalizing, but I believe that this approach should be further developed. For example, increased delegations, fewer rules, when the acquisitions are either not particularly complex or when not a great deal of money is involved. Another matter is illustrated by the debate about the appropriate organization and mandates of departments and agencies involved in defence procurement. Looking at our allies, it's clear there is no perfect model. Whatever model is chosen, it seems to me that it must take into account the political, legal, and cultural environment. Changing our current machinery, which involves a great many departments and agencies, without resolving the various issues and challenges surrounding DP would seem to me to be very problematic. In conclusion, to the extent that the points I have made are valid, I would suggest that they need to be addressed together if a material improvement in DP is to be brought about. As these issues involve multiple departments and legal and regulatory machinery issues, they can only succeed if reforms have the support of the Prime Minister. A single minister, a single department ain't going to make material changes in this area. It has to be a pan-government operation. In the end, cultural issues may be as important as substantive ones. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Fadden.